I know a lot of people say, like, how much am I gonna get? But see, you can't really know because you have to look into liability. You have to look into your believability or credibility, how you do, whether they like you. It's not an exact science, basically. Hi everyone, this is Arkady Frekhtman. I'm a New York City personal injury trial attorney, and today we're going to talk about the value of back injuries, specifically serious herniated discs that require fusion surgery. When you have a back injury, one of the common back injuries is either going to be a bulging disc or a herniated disc. And you could see it on a model. Usually the difference is when you have a bulging disc, it just means the disc itself, which is the white part here, the circle, and then you see the vertebrae on top, that's the bone in your spine. So the disc will bulge out a bit or just get a little bit bigger, bulge out, kind of like a balloon. And that part can touch the nerve roots, which causes pain, but it won't rupture and it won't leak out completely. That's known as a protrusion or a herniation, when the disc itself just explodes and then the liquid inside the disc starts leaking. And the discs actually have rings inside of them, kind of like when you cut a tree and you look inside, and the trees have rings, and they say the number of rings is how old the tree is. In the same way, the discs have rings inside, and in the very center of the disc is the nucleus pulposus, which is the liquid part. So for that liquid part to break through all those rings, all those walls, and then to explode the disc and then to leak outside the disc, there has to be a pretty serious trauma. And you see here, the red part, that's the herniated disc where it's leaking out and it touches the nerve root, which is behind the spine. And remember, the nerves aren't just like you see here, they continue and they go, and from the lower back they go down to the legs, from the neck they travel to the arms, and they allow you to move, and that's how everything is connected. So it's a very serious injury if you have a spine injury like this. And from what we've seen, if it's a bulging disc or a herniated disc that is just soft tissue, meaning you get your treatment, but you don't do anything, those are usually worth anywhere maybe up to like $50,000 or less, right? Because they're more soft tissue. Now, if you have epidural steroid injections, that could be worth anywhere from $35,000 up to even $100,000, $150,000. And if you have a discectomy, which is a type of surgery, percutaneous discectomy, where they remove the leak from the disc, but it's done with a striker decompressor, which is almost like a needle decompressing the disc, very minimally invasive, maybe like a 10-15 minute surgery. That can go up to $200,000, $300,000. We've even seen cases go for like over $500,000 for that. And then if you have the final stage, which is the fusion surgery, the value could then get into the many millions. It could be even like 4 million, 7 million and up. So we could look at a few cases. I've actually organized this. What I searched for here was I looked at lumbar fusions as well as cervical fusions. And I looked at the most recent cases. So one of the most recent I found was this case out of Texas, and it was a rear end by a truck, and it led to severe disc injuries, and it happened in Bexar County. The trial, the result, was August 22nd of 2024. So fairly recent. And what happened was that on October 2nd of 2020, about 4 years earlier, the plaintiff, who was 25, was driving a Toyota Camry. The defendant was another individual who rear-ended him in a Ford F-250. And the defendant was working for a construction LLC, a construction company, at the time of the crash. What happened was the plaintiff was taken to the emergency room on his own on the date of the collision, and then he had 2 cervical disc herniations with nerve root impingement, which we saw in the model, right? The nerve root impingement is when the herniation touches the nerve like that. That's the nerve root impingement. That's what causes the pain, and that's when you need to get treatment and therapy. So that's what he had. And he tried chiropractic care. In fact, he went 42 times to a chiropractor. He had epidural steroid injections, medical branch blocks, radiofrequency ablations. And in December of 2023, he had a 2-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion surgery. It was a pretty serious injury. So at trial, what happened was that the jury found that the defendants were liable for the crash and that the harm to the plaintiff resulted from gross negligence because it was such a bad crash. And then they allowed for total damages of $5,951,000. And the way they broke that down was there was $328,000 for past medical costs, $820,000 for future medical costs, $350,000 for past physical impairment, $800,000 for future physical impairment, $2 million for future pain and suffering, $1 million for past pain and suffering, $150,000 for past disfigurement and $100,000 for future disfigurement, $250,000 for past mental anguish and $100,000 for future mental anguish. So taking all those, and also $2,500 of punitive damages against the defendant and $50,000 in punitive damages against the construction company that he worked for. And so the total was $5.9 million. The demand on the case was actually $4.2 million, and the offer was $291,000. The trial took 4 days. The jury deliberated for 2.5 hours, and the jury vote was 12-0. Yeah, so that's an interesting case, a pretty good result. And you could also see how in Texas, they can sue for all these things, right? Like the disfigurement, mental anguish, physical impairment. In New York, that's all subsumed under pain and suffering. So you could talk about that, but you only get the category of past pain and suffering, future pain and suffering. You don't get all those extra categories. I think that's a good thing for plaintiffs, actually. Because if you have all those extra categories, well, now what you could do is, you can ask for more money, and then the jurors have to give you more money for each category, so you're getting more compensation. Here's another case out of California. What happened here was, this was from August 15th of 2024. The incident happened June of 2021. And what happened here was plaintiff was a rideshare driver driving a compact vehicle in Los Angeles on Interstate 5 freeway. And he came to a complete stop in response to traffic ahead. Then a van was unable to stop, striking those two vehicles, like in a chain reaction. What happened here was he sustained a herniated disc at C6, C7. He claimed he would have severely restricted neck motion for the remainder of his life. And he had a microdiscectomy surgery with a pain management doctor in November of 2021. But then he had a C6, C7 discectomy and fusion surgery with a spine surgeon on November 10th of 2021. And he needed a spinal cord stimulator, and he claimed he would need to operate spinal cord stimulator with a remote for the remainder of his life. He could no longer work as a rideshare driver. So pretty serious damages. He claimed $742,000 in past lien-based medical expenses, and he further claimed $1.9 million in future medical specials. And his attorney asked that the jury return a verdict against the two defendants from $4.5 to $4.8 million. So he gave them a range, but like a pretty tight range. And the jury was able to view the front and rear dash cam videos of one of the vehicles that was behind the plaintiff's vehicle to judge the severity of the impact. And the defense had an expert in accident reconstruction testify that the combined forces of those two vehicles only were like 2 to 3 miles per hour, which was too minor to cause all these injuries. And they said the initial impact to the rear of the plaintiff's car resulted in a 7 to 9 delta V, which the expert admitted could result in sprains and strains, but no structural or anatomical changes. So they basically argued the impact was minor, that this plaintiff denied injuries at the scene, that he drove from the scene, that his initial attorney referred him to all this treatment just 2 weeks after the accident, and that he intentionally covered up a prior motor vehicle accident 3 years earlier in which he also alleged injuries to his neck and lower back. And so the jury found that the defendant's negligence was a substantial factor in causing harm to the plaintiff, but not to the degree that the plaintiff had claimed. And so the jury awarded the plaintiff in this case $178,000. So much smaller than what he was looking for, which was $4.5 to $4.8 million. They actually gave $157,000 in past medical costs, $10,600 in future medical costs, $3,600 in future pain and suffering, and 6,500 in past pain and suffering. The demand was 1 million, and the offer was actually 400,000. So he had a better offer than the verdict, more than double. The trial took 13 days, and the jury deliberated for 9 hours. The jury vote was 9-3. Actually, it was different. It was 9-3 on past economic and on future non-economic, but it was 10-2 on past non-economic and future economic. So I guess in California you have 12 jurors, so you have to get 9 out of the 12. So some of the vote was 9-3, some of it was 10-2. Here's a case out of Florida, Palm Beach. What happened here was, this happened July 26th of 2024. It was a 60-year-old lady plaintiff. On November 17th of 2018, she was at a cheesecake factory when an employee removed a chair and she fell to the ground. And she ended up having an L4, L5 herniation. And then she had a 2-level lumbar fusion in July of 2021. And so the jury determined that Cheesecake Factory was 25% at fault and that plaintiff was 75% at fault. And they awarded $370,000, but comparative fault reduction, because the plaintiff cannot recover for her own percentage of fault. So then the verdict was only $92,500. Here's a case out of North Carolina with a defendant driver saying they had the last clear chance to avoid a crash. What happened here, this was in July 16th of 2024 for a female plaintiff who was 40 years old. In January of 2019, the plaintiff, who was a physiatrist in her mid-40s, was driving at an intersection and the defendant ran a red light and struck her rear passenger door. And she argued that the defendant was negligent for running the red light, and basically she had tears in her cervical spine, 18 visits to a chiropractor, plasma injection, and then she didn't receive any treatment between April and September of 2019, but then she returned to the chiropractor and consulted with a neurosurgeon, and the doctor recommended a 2-level cervical fusion, which the plaintiff underwent in December of 2019. So she sought recovery of $250,000 in past medical expenses and also past and future non-economic, which is the pain and suffering. She requested $950,000. And defense said the surgery was not medically necessary. Defense said the chiropractor's records indicated the plaintiff had returned to her pre-injury condition. So the defense additionally claimed that the charges related to the surgery were excessive, that the neurosurgeon's expert testified that for his fee for a 2-level cervical fusion is only $6,000. I haven't heard of such numbers, but that's what he said. The jury concluded that the negligence of both parties contributed to the injury. However, they determined that the defendant had the last clear chance to avoid the crash, and therefore the defendant was liable. And they determined that the plaintiff was entitled to $100,000 for her injuries. However, they also concluded that the plaintiff's actual damages should be reduced by $25,000 because of her unreasonable failure to avoid or minimize her injuries. Thus, her net damages were $75,000. And the offer was $200,000, so the plaintiff only got $100,000. It was a 12-0 jury vote and a 5-day trial with a 5-hour deliberation. So, yeah, you see these cases, like there's not really like a pattern. I know a lot of people say, like, how much am I going to get? But see, you can't really know because you have to look into liability. You have to look into your believability or credibility, how you do, whether they like you. There's so many different factors, and it's impossible to tell. Like sometimes you're surprised. You listen to these reports, right, and you think, oh wow, that's such a serious injury. That should be like $5 million because the past one was $5 million. But instead of $5 million, it's only like $100,000, or sometimes it's zero. So they really, it's not an exact science, basically. Here's actually a case out of New York. This is Manhattan. This was July 8th of this year for a 59-year-old lady plaintiff. What happened here was on October 18th, 2018, the plaintiff was driving on East 125th Street and the FDR. She was stopped for a red light and she got sideswiped. And so she sued the trucking company, the leasing company, the logistics company, and she ended up having physical therapy, herniations in the neck, and then 2 epidurals, and eventually a 3-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion from C4, I believe, to C7. So the plaintiff attorney asked that the jury allow for $600,000 in lost earnings and $1.2 million in damages based on the life care plan. That was the economic damages, as well as non-economic damages of the pain and suffering. Defense counsel argued that it was a low-speed collision, was insufficient to cause significant injuries. They also argued that the plaintiff had a pre-existing degenerative injury to her neck and that any complaint of neck pain was not caused by this crash. And the jury determined that the plaintiff's damages totaled $4.17 million. So they gave $680,000 future medical costs, $215,000 past lost earnings, $275,000 future lost earnings, $2.4 million future pain and suffering, and $600,000 past pain and suffering. So the total was 4.17. And it was the demand was 2.5, the offer was 100,000, the trial took 2 weeks, and the jury deliberated for 3.5 hours. So a pretty good result there. Okay, I hope this was helpful. These are some of the cases that we're seeing with cervical and lumbar fusions. We'll do a few more, and we'll try to get into the details and the nitty-gritty for you. Let us know what questions you have. Let us know what videos you want to see. And remember, we're here for you. Our goal is helping serious injury victims and families. And let us know how we could help you. If you need a consultation, just text me. It's 347-566-9595. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.